Why did the Jets do what they did yesterday?
I think it was really about the opportunities that got put in front of them. The Colts initiated the conversation on Sauce, and, the Cowboys had been calling around and had actually broached the topic of Quinnen when the Micah Parsons talks were going on. So, I think it's interesting, hearing about the Jets process and what they went through and how they've assessed their roster. And, one big thing I think at the beginning of all of this was when they signed Sauce Gardner to the contract in July. It was like, let's make sure this is a responsible contract that we could trade, because you just never know what's going to come along. You never know what's going to happen. So, you want to reward the player, but then you also want to give yourself that flexibility, and that pays off here. And, I think there's still Darren Moji and Aaron Glenn in an evaluation process on their roster. And I do think like their view of what they were in July and August hasn't really come to fruition. I think that goes without saying, right? So they're at 1-7. And these offers start coming in, and they've sort of put word out that they were open for business on almost everybody in the roster. Quinnen was one guy that seemed like he was off limits, along with Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. And once the bidding started, I think the Micah Parsons deal sort of became the bellwether on Sauce. And so, that was 2 first-round picks and a quality player, which, the Cowboys got Kenny Clark in that deal, and the Jets wind up with A.D. Mitchell here. And then I think the completion of the Sauce deal sort of kicked the Quinnen talks into overdrive. And now, they're set up. I think the most interesting thing about this, right? Like, so we all know they've got 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks this coming year, and then 3 first-round picks in what should be a bumper crop, in 2027. That's what NFL people are talking about how good that draft is. But at the time being, like, they still have a nice core of young players. Garrett Wilson at receiver. We'll see if they re-sign Breece. But then, the tackle positions, Olu Fashanu and Armand Membu at defensive end. They've got Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald. So there's still young talent to work with there. And, really when you're talking about their timeline, their ability to get a quarterback done, now they've got a lot of capital going forward.
So let me just hit the 2027 draft, 2026 and 27 drafts, because it's not just for the Jets fan base out there. Yeah. There's the Browns as well. There's other ones clearly that might be in their minds quarterback needy or prospect needy. And we spoke to Daniel Jeremiah last week, Albert, and he's like, I haven't really grinded the tape just yet, but I have no earthly idea who the first overall pick of the 2026 draft. And we all know the quarterback class, it hasn't really come to the fore. The conversations that we were having, it sounds real quaint now, about Arch Manning and the Browns being asked, point blank, what about Arch before the season even began, right? Like that was asked of ownership. You were shaking your head. You know what I mean? So
it was crazy though, because you remember me talking to everybody off the ledge in May. I do feel vindicated with this one. You know what I mean?
Of course. So, but walk me through what you are hearing about those classes as we're now post trade deadline, and there's a lot of teams that have fan bases already looking forward to next year. Albert.
Yeah. So for the most part, what I've heard about 26 is the top of the draft isn't very strong. And, you've got Bain from Miami as defensive end. You've got Proctor, the tackle from Alabama. Like, there are some names that are thrown around up there, Caleb Downs at Ohio State. But I don't think that you're looking at it and saying, like, God, man, if you're in the top 10 or 15, you're going to walk away with a franchise player at a premium position. I just don't know that exists at the top of this year's draft. Then look ahead a year. Right? Look into 2027. You have Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. You have Ryan Williams at Alabama. You have a couple of edge rushers in Colin Simmons at Texas and Dylan Stewart at South Carolina. You've got a premium corner in Leonard Moore at Notre Dame. And oh, by the way, the quarterbacks, like, I don't know where these guys are going to be a year from now. So this is just speculative.
Sure.
But Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. You have C.J. Carr at Notre Dame. You have Arch Manning potentially then, if he can improve, coming out in 27 out of Texas. You have Julian Sand at Ohio State. So, like, I know we always kind of like look at this like, but wait until next year. You know what I mean? Like, but it does feel like you're looking at a lot of guys in that class who are top end players now and were contributing as true freshmen. A lot of those guys were playing as true freshmen, And so that was part of the Jets thinking was, okay, how do we want this trade structured? And they actually asked the Cowboys for a first round pick in 27 rather than 26, taking the 2 in 26. And that was the reason why. And I think you're going to see some of that thinking as we get closer to the draft too, unless we see big jumps from some of these guys over the course of the next couple of months that'll be in the 26 class. I think you are going to see some teams that are going to be at least open to the idea of moving 26 picks into 27.
How about that? What's your reporting on the Chiefs coming close to Breece Hall? What's your reporting on that, Albert?
Well, I mean, obviously that ties to, a current injury they have with Isaiah Pacheco. Now, they do expect Pacheco back, but depth is a question at that position. Pacheco has been banged up a lot over the last couple of years. They didn't have him at the end of last year, which obviously was a problem for them. And so, the idea of adding a running back was certainly on the board for them. So, they've got an older player in Kareem Hunt there now. Brashard Smith's a really interesting weapon, and he is a running back by trade. But the idea of adding a player was definitely on their radar, as well as adding a defensive tackle potentially over the last week or so. I just think the price was too high, There was a point earlier in the year where I think you might have been able to get Breece Hall for a fourth from the Jets. But, this is another one of those things. Like the Jets, I think, have been really intentional about evolving their value on their players over the course of the year. And, even though they haven't been very good, Breece Hall has been so central to what they're trying to do offensively. And his value is bumped up even a little bit by Braylon Allen, who they thought a lot of being hurt. They thought Allen was going to be almost like a 1A, 1B with Hall, and not having him, I think made Hall even more valuable to what they're doing in the here and the now. So I don't think that the Chiefs were going to go to a 3rd-round pick on a player that's just a rental, and that's what Breece Hall would be with an expiring contract.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Check us out every single day streaming live on Disney Plus and the ESPN app 12 to 3 Eastern.